Hi, and welcome back to This Week in Voice, Season 8, brand new season. Really excited about it. We have posted the full list of participants and participating companies on thisweekinvoice.com. You can check it out there. We're really excited to bring together the conversational AI universe. And we've been doing it longer than anybody expected. So we're grateful for that. And we're grateful for all the participants across a really emergent and positive space for technology. We're going to get into it with Season 8, Episode 1, and we've got a great panel of guests. The first one is Jody Balani of Fresh River AI. Jody, say hello. Tell us who you are. Tell us about your company.
Sure. Thank you, Bradley. Appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. I'm Jyoti Balani. I'm founder and managing director of FreshRiver.ai. We're a consultancy. We do strategy and delivery of conversational AI and data science services for the Fortune 100, now expanding to Fortune 500. We began this journey about 5 years ago. I came in from a corporate background of about 22 years, building products for the wireless wireline cloud infrastructure space. And that's about the time that natural language processing engines got better. And I branched out on my own, starting a consulting firm. So I'm happy to be here. We've done projects for companies like Citigroup, for Lowe's, for Johnson & Johnson. The list is growing, and we're very excited to be here, Bradley. Thank you, and I'm happy to be with the rest of the panelists here as well.
Jody, it's great to have you on the show. You do a lot of great work, and just appreciate everything you're doing. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Next up is Peter Suma of Applied Brain Research. Peter, say hello.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Brad. So Applied Brain Research is a company spun out of the University of Waterloo. We've been doing the foundational research is explaining how brains work. And so the work of doing that is analyzing brain circuits and looking at what are mathematical models that can be created to see what those circuits are doing. And is that a contribution to, how AI works? Can you find things in combing through brain circuits? And believe it or not, that work's been going on at the lab at Waterloo for a long time. One of the algorithms that we discovered was a mathematical model that best describes how something called a time cell in the brain, part of the brain called the hippocampus, works. And it turned out to be mathematically optimally small for representing and classifying signals. And so we took that, took the math model and designed a computer chip with it. And that chip is a time series processor. And what's the biggest time series workload out there that people would like to get out of data centers, squish down and put into devices? Speech and language. And so we now have the world's smallest speech and language models compressed onto a chip. The chip dev kits will be out at the end of the year. And this is going to bring speech and language, sort of like, the virtual assistants you're used to in the cloud, except now compressed onto device. So it doesn't need a connection. It's more private because your sound doesn't go to the cloud, and it operates faster because it's immediate without any latency. And that can bring, for product managers, can bring voice services to devices like cameras and toys and cars cheaper, less energy, and less expensive overall. So we're excited to be here, really excited to start engaging with the voice community through Project Voice. We'll be at the show coming up, and yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thanks for having us, Brad.
Peter, it's great to have you. And in full transparency, ABR is one of the first investments of Project Voice Capital Partners, rolling fund, and we're excited about that too. Great to have you on the show, Peter.
Thank you.
Next up is Jason Banks of Invoke. Jason, super interesting company. Tell us who you are. Tell us who you're with.
Thanks, Bradley. My name's Jason Banks. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Invoke. We are a 20-year-old speech recognition provider, primarily in the healthcare space. Our focus is on at-home clinicians that are typically working in a home health, hospice, palliative care setting, but also, physician at home practice as well. And what we're enabling is for those clinicians to document at a faster rate of speed, more accurately than they could via typing. And that's just the base layer. We build a lot of machine learning and tools on top of that that would enable sort of smart charting as they go. But it's really wonderful. We've got a lot of momentum in the industry, and happy to be with the rest of the panel today.
Jason, it's been great to get to meet y'all and learn more about what you do, and we're honored to have you join us. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm Bradley Metrock, CEO of Project Voice, and we're going to get on into the news. And we've got a really interesting story for story number 1 of season 8, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to read the headline out loud. It's from Time magazine. OpenAI used Kenyan workers on less than $2 per hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. So, as we always do with the show, we have a rotation and then we sort of open the floor for conversation. And Jody, I'm going to start with you. This is an interesting story. This came out yesterday while I was still at Digital Book World and happened to see it, and fortunate when it came out so we can include it. Your thoughts? I would love to hear them.
Sure. This is not news per se, right? If you think about smart speakers, we've seen this over the last couple of years ourselves, where low-paid workers globally, are even going back, right, the internet, to keep images that are, not for viewing, to keep us safe. So it's not a new thing, but the problem now we have is with these newer technologies coming in, they're following the same path, right? So this is the dichotomy of these models that need human intervention to keep us safe, but it's at the cost of human psychology and mental hurt, right? As the story goes, which is a little disturbing. Actually, it's a lot disturbing. Is that the workers that were doing this were actually haunted by the images that they're seeing. So the question is, do we continue to need humans to do this, or could we actually leverage AI itself to find these images, right? So I would encourage and challenge, those in the labs and the R&D. You've got to find a better way to do two things, right? One, yes, we need to keep humanity safe from some of the disturbing stuff that's out there. But two, we cannot do it at the expense of the human condition. So, I'm a believer in human-first capitalism and activism. I think there is a way to do all three, and we just have to push harder. I think we've got the best brains, in industry and the world at large, right? It's a flat world, as Thomas Friedman says, to bring that to bear. It's too easy to just go and say, hey, we're going to take this group of humans. They don't have any other jobs. We're going to give this to them. Yes, you created, economic lift, but at what cost, right? So that's really how I'm thinking about this. We're actually exploring this. I've been incubating a training program for the last 2.5 years, started in the pandemic because of the talent gap in this space, also for training algorithms. So we're looking at expanding this out into the world where people get paid not just for training these algorithms, but as royalty, right? As blockchain comes on and starts to become mainstream, we're a little away from that, but the royalty payment. So we're really connecting the dots to say, how do we do this in a safe way? How do we lift people out of their low socioeconomic status and still deliver a quality product? That's really where I think our challenge is.
You lasered in on kind of the abuse part of the story, and it's interesting because we all remember that story about Facebook, whenever that was, about their moderators needing to seek mental health help for seeing pornographic images and abusive images and stuff like that. It's I like the way you phrased it, responsible capitalism. Basically, it's, there's room for capitalism, but even for someone like me who is a little bit more unabashed about it, there's limits to everything. And this kind of scrapes up against that. I think you phrased that really, really well. Peter, I'm going to go to you. Same question. Interesting story, a very impactful story people are going to be talking about. Your thoughts?
So I think all the comments made, I agree with maybe I'll just try and say, where might the next trajectory of all this end up? First to note that the public relations exposure of the story and what happened has caused the company that was doing the work, one of OpenAI's subcontractors, has pulled back from that kind of business. But yet the advances of AI, very much require this. Governments are also connecting other lines of disturbing content and manipulation. Governments are also looking into laws around regulating the increasing negative effects of these kinds of content on the networks. So the worker side, there are protections even in Kenya. I just quickly looked it up before the call, and Kenya has a number of where this work took place, has a number of protections around worker health and safety. The US has occupational worker health and safety laws. So it's not unthinkable that what might begin to happen is more and more application of these kinds of laws to those kinds of working environments now that there's attention on it. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's certainly going to raise the cost of doing training, and training is already very expensive. But that said, it is the right direction. So ultimately speaking, proper frameworks, proper awareness for the workers that are doing this kind of work, the same kinds of training methods, I think, in occupational health and safety that are used in the medical professions, in fire response and police. There are methods for training people to develop psychological both resistance and also recover from the harm of these kinds of things. I can imagine how damaging it is, but I think we need to just apply those. Now, on the technological side, the real hope is that self-supervised learning, pre-training, clustering, and all of these other methods, the test data set accuracies on labeling harmful data are up in the 86, 87% range. Again, I was just checking on Papers with Code this morning about this. So in the wild, what are those efficiencies? They're still not rivaling human as far as I know. But I do think, and have recently read comments, I think it was by Yann LeCun, about Facebook having gone a long way in automating the detection of these things. And the more we automate, the more that we reduce the need for humans to do the labeling, and therefore less, social harm. So a combination of raising the wage rates, enforcing the laws we have, putting the techniques around supporting the people choosing to do this kind of work, I think will go a long way to reducing the exploitive aspect of it and making it an actual profession, and then automating as much as possible around it. And that rise in labor rates around the work, my last comment will drive the economic value for systems that are automating this kind of monitoring. And that will ultimately result in a good thing where we reduce the amount of human damage to achieve the moderated outcomes that we desperately need.
Yeah, no, I think that all of that's well said. And Jason, I'm going to go to you. I want to ask, same question, interesting story, a lot of surface area to it. You come from a unique point of view on this, just with Invoke's unique point of view and line of sight on the space. Your thoughts?
Yeah, very much agree with the other panelists, and and talking about the proper way of automating these processes. I'm sort of glad that these types of stories are coming to light. For many years in the manufacturing side, and even today, talk about some of the some of the lithium stories that are coming out in Africa, but they're dealing primarily with the physical harms of the work being done. This is dealing with primarily the mental, emotional, and more psychological aspects, negative aspects of the work being done. And I agree with you. The more that you can automate these processes and bring all the right people to the table, the better off for everyone, including those workers.
Yeah, complete agreement. And it's interesting. We all anybody wants to talk about is OpenAI, right? And ChatGPT. And when we rolled out the industry landscape map, we rolled it out. It was a lightning bolt, and we said, look, this was ad hoc. We're going to add a bunch of people. We didn't leave anybody off intentionally. This was just a lot to get our hands around. But we had people, you can go on LinkedIn right now and see where I posted it, where people are saying, OpenAI should have been like 100x larger and make everybody else smaller, because they're really and I'm paraphrasing them, I'm kind of you know, some of them were more direct about it than others. They're really all that matters. So why is everybody else with them? And my response was, give it time. We have a way of it's just our nature is to attack the front runner, and that's exactly what's going on here. I think that while the story is very interesting, and I think it's highly legitimate, you have to take pause at how Time presents this. And I'm going to read it again. OpenAI used Kenyan workers on less than $2 per hour to make and this is the key part at the end, to make ChatGPT less toxic. So in other words, it's just an assumption, it's just a given that everybody in the universe understands that this thing is toxic. And this company hired people and manipulated them and took advantage of them to make it less toxic. So, we want to shield people from abuse, but I think it's and we talked about that, with some great commentary from y'all. But I also think it is worth noting that clearly the media, you see a little bit of fatigue perhaps from the media coming out in this piece and presenting it in a way that's not exactly optimal for the company. But nevertheless, this is going to be one of these stories that people are talking about just because ChatGPT is what everybody's talking about. Any closing comments on any of this before we move on?
Yeah, I would just put one comment, Bradley. We have to be balanced, responsible human beings, right? A company that comes out to solve a problem, is trying to do its best. They could have done it where they didn't have to go, down this path of abuse, et cetera. Why wouldn't they think about the human condition, right? What were the other alternatives, right? If Facebook and other companies, the big tech companies, already have access to tech that's doing more detection, and then using fewer of that, why wouldn't they have looked at that? But the media doesn't do anybody any favors. I'm still looking for a media outlet that gives a balanced perspective on everything. And historically, if you think of everything from when we moved from horses to cars, right? We moved from farms to factories. This is just history repeating itself, but can we do it better this time, right? That's the only thing I would say. So I always say, I'm not enamored by any new shiny technology thing that comes out. You got to look at it, like you said, give it time, but the right people have to be at the helm to make the right decisions, right? So that's my feeling on this, is we got to stay responsible and we got to stay balanced.
Yeah, well said. And the thing about OpenAI too is that they are not a community participant. They may feel differently about it, and they're kind of off on their own, doing their own thing. And I think that factors into the story as well. They're not part of the Open Voice network. They don't care about any of that. They're just out doing their own thing. And I think that given the rest of the circumstances is a negative. Peter and Jason, any closing comments before we move on?
So there's an economic opportunity here in content identification, and encouraging entrepreneurs and large companies to make the state-of-the-art services available as a platform for the entire market, not just the lead participant alone. And so I hope market forces will weigh in here and make that service available to all those other companies who are trying to innovate in the space, and that'll be good overall, and it'll also push the science and the application of the science to automate this sector and reduce the human harm.
Agree with that, and also to your earlier point of making sure that the states are becoming more involved in legislating and putting guardrails around this to protect those that may be unaware of the risks.
Yeah, well said. And it's it's people like me who don't necessarily want the government getting involved in everything, but it's with this, it's not a bad thing, because if not for any other reason, it's just all moving so quickly that it doesn't help to have a broader conversation. Great commentary, and love starting off the season with that story. We're going to move on. The story number 2 is from ABC News. I'm going to read the headline: Collection of voice data for profit raises privacy fears. So what I tried to do with these stories to start this off, the season off in general, is sort of paint a picture of conversational AI is at a period of deep flux, and we're starting to get a healthy pushback, not just with OpenAI, which we just discussed, but all across the board. And I think it's a good thing. And Peter, I'm going to start with you with this, and then Jason and Jody. Interesting story here. It's presented in an interesting way. Your thoughts?
I mean, it's definitely ARM did a study about a couple of years back. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, about what consumers were looking for in terms of edge AI. And one of the aspects that was discussed in the study was specifically about privacy. And if I recall the numbers correctly, it was something in the order of 60+% didn't want the sound going to the cloud if it could be avoided, because it's one thing to give an instruction to a device. It's another thing to realize that the sound of, standard household things going on, arguments, God knows what, is going up into the cloud, and that's being accessed potentially by humans, let alone the machinery, and then recorded and used for training purposes, all of which is in the use terms of most of these services. And people just don't want that. They want the command to go up and everything else to be negated out. They almost feel more strongly about it, I think, and this is just my guess, is in the automotive sector, where it's a very confined space and pretty much everything that's said goes through the speaker. And so that ambient monitoring of things unintended versus the command that's given, I think, is a major privacy concern. In terms of the profit motivation of it and the training set, yeah, it's inherent in the user agreements. If you want the benefit, this is sort of the economic model that has evolved with it. And that's going to be an interesting one over time. Credit assignment in that, it's one thing in the training platform. I know that the other speaker had mentioned that earlier, which sounds like a great idea for the training side. For the wild side of the public, and how their data is being used, my own personal guess is the current economic model is likely to be the continuance. So it will be the case that if you want the benefit to use it, you are going to in some way at least be contributing your data to train the system. Personally, I don't have an issue with that. I've not felt a privacy concern around it. I would like the termination at the edge, though, of the noise in the background, and that's one of the reasons we're pursuing the solution we're pursuing.
Excellent. Jason, I'm going to go to you, and obviously this is front and center for y'all. Interesting story. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is interesting, and agree with the comments that there's probably going to be a lot more partitioning of what can be used, not used, recorded, not recorded, sent up to the cloud, not sent up to the cloud. It's interesting. One of the things that we're seeing, at least in the healthcare side of the space, is actually looking at things like tone, tenor, speed of talking to perhaps indicate some health related issues. And so while there is certainly a deep concern for using data beyond voice commands specifically, we're seeing more requests for ambient type recording in, let's say, senior living communities or at-home geriatric members or residents, to dictate, hey, is there an ability to use the technology in a more ambient way to identify different needs or potential red flags or warning signs within those organizations. And obviously Illinois, where I'm located, is brought out in this, is having some of the strongest laws that requires those companies to obtain written consent from individuals before collecting a lot of that ambient data, and really prohibits organizations from selling or profiting off the information. So there's probably we're probably just at the very beginning stages of looking at voice assisted products and allowing the consumer to sort of partition off what gets sent up to the cloud, what doesn't, and what ultimately gets used. I think we're just at the very start of that.
Excellent. And Jody, I'm going to go to you. Same question. Interesting story. You're all over this just with what you do and with Open Voice Network as well. Your thoughts.
Yeah, so this is a continuation of what we've seen before, right? If you remember Meta and the Cambridge Analytica scandal that came in, right? If you don't have laws, and US does not, right? Europe's got, have put some frameworks into place. This whole thing around regulation is a last-ditch effort if people don't act with integrity, right? So if you use capitalism as your driving force with no concern to anything else, you're going to see more of this happening, right? There's actually another study that came out that shows there are data collectors that are collecting our data. So if you think about our data, you think about our voice, our imagery, anything that is private to us, I think until we can put a framework into place where it's more opt-in versus, hey, we will give you an opportunity to opt out, but by default, we're going to keep opt-in. We're going to see more and more of these issues, right? It's like trying to play, I forget what the game is at these festivals. What do they call them? Whack-a-mole? Whack-a-mole, yes. Right? This is another whack-a-mole that's going to come out. I think the US, the White House came out with, surprisingly, just a blueprint for AI, but nothing, no teeth in it. And so now everybody's going to market with it. Money is the main objective versus trying to say, how to do this correctly. No incentives in place, right? Do you use a carrot or a stick for people to do the right thing? Healthcare data, social media data. It's not going to work. We're going to see more and more. The media can come out and keep saying it. Nobody's really fixing it, right? I think we have to come together as a community and start to put a framework into place, a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be products that, other people are going to capitalize on.
No, I think that's really well said. And, at the, I was sort of thinking about toward the beginning of COVID. So, May, June-ish, 2020. And then through that summer, the folks at Carnegie Mellon came up with a solution, I guess I'll call it, that where they could listen to your voice and within a very high range of confidence that wasn't quite good enough for something like the FDA or regulatory agencies, but still, for the most part, works, could listen to your voice and tell if you have COVID right now or have recently had it. Because COVID in its sort of original version altered it altered your voice, it altered a lot of stuff, and they could tell. And in talking to them about that project and that initiative, as well as just our friends at Canary Speech, who's a company I love as well, that listens to biomarkers and all that sort of thing. I mean, the data that is there in people's voice, separate and apart from the words that they're actually speaking and all the data inherent in that, just the intonation and the characteristics of the voice, you can gather so much, and somebody's going to abuse that, and there's going to be some major blow up over that. It's just a matter of time, and it depends on who it happens to, who the victim is, to determine what the trajectory of what comes afterward is. That's just the way our society seems to work, but that's coming for sure. That was sort of what screamed at me from reading the story, but it was interesting to hear y'all's thoughts. Any closing thoughts on that before we move on?
Just one that society's faced this problem before, of the idea of data being useful in its aggregate form, exploitable, but at the same time, the sort of social good of allowing it to be used in an anonymized form, and it's healthcare. So when we think about speech interaction, when we think about interaction with all of these AIs, one of the useful frameworks would be to say, okay, look, let's, as a first cut, let's start making it the case that if you're going to use it in aggregate form, it's got to be anonymized, de-identified. And then, then you can get into the secondary issues of, can you use it to, target an individual in terms of a sales process, in terms of guiding how you interact. in some of those areas, we have to start thinking about basically the same frameworks we use for ethical conduct in financial services or something. Where does selling cross into manipulation, know your client rules and things like that? So I think the fact that it's an AI system and the fact of the distribution of data and the efficiency of collection and distribution doesn't really change that we've already solved a lot of these problems, and maybe thinking more broadly about those and introducing them as best practices in industry. And I'll leave off the comment, where does the regulation begin? That's a bigger question for others to think about, but we're not without models to bring to these hard problems.
Yeah, completely agree. Jason, Jody, any closing thoughts or ready to move on?
Yeah, I think, just my closing thought on it is just a lot more transparency in, what is being used, how it's being used. And I don't know whether that is, coming from, legislation, or it's coming from just, really solid actors in the space saying, hey, we're going to be transparent about what we're collecting, what we're using the data for, what exactly we're using. And that ultimately is, going to win the day from a consumer perspective, just the knowledge and awareness of those organizations, companies that are actually transparent, open with how they're using the data, what they're using it for, and really they are winning out in the marketplace.
Yeah, I would add one more thing. Shareholder value, right? So if you think about value creation from a capitalistic standpoint for every company, right? There's now louder cries for ESG measurements, right? Indices and metrics. I think if we add the responsible use of AI broadly into it, I think the shareholders will speak with their wallets. There's actually a nonprofit called Just Capital. Arianna Huffington and a couple of other pretty high-profile folks are on there. So they're measuring and putting into place for the Fortune 500 companies, everything from how they treat workers. So I think this might be another measure to put in, is the responsible use of AI and auditing, right? If you think about all the audit frameworks, we're going to have to put that into place. And I think the money will speak. If money's not flowing to these companies, from an investment standpoint, I think that might be another trigger.
Perfect. Yeah, the great commentary all the way around. Appreciate that. And we will move to story number 3. This is from our friends at VoiceBot.ai. Artists file class action lawsuit against Stability AI, Midjourney, and DeviantArt over generative AI art. So this article is brief, but it covers quite a bit. And Jason, I'm going to start with you. And then Jody and Peter. Interesting, the pendulum always swings back the other way. We talked about it really in context of both these opening 2 stories. Interesting piece here. Want to get your thoughts?
Yeah, so my thought is this goes right to the heart of NFT, and does part of artistic impression relate to protection, meaning, if AI is, in this particular case, relying on, billions of images, as the article states, and pulling out pieces and parts of those billions of images to create some new AI generated image, is it protected under the law? And I think that we're going to get to a point where it is. I think that the artists that are arguing for protection are basically equating this to music streaming services, and that there should be a solution for images as well. And so I think it's going to be interesting as AI continues to work on image related, not just other artistic forms like music. And is there a compensation for using pieces and parts of those artistics to create something new? And so it's monetization of artistic impressions. And, you know, I was thinking to an article that I read the other day about ChatGPT, and the reality is that it is still reliant on doing a search of human created content. So if you ask, you know, ChatGPT to generate a new mission statement, do a haiku, you know, for you, whatever it is, it's still ultimately relying on human created content to pull that all together. It can't pull it out of thin air. And so, you know, this reminds me of that in a lot of different ways, the article does.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I just read about so Kane Sims of the UX World reposted something on LinkedIn that I included in a presentation I gave earlier this week at Digital Book World about this guy, young guy, decided to write a book about code that's like a long book, and he wrote it in a very short amount of time, and he listed ChatGPT as his co-author, and posted it online, and just very proud of himself, and just got a bunch of comments, you know, a lot of positive comments. But one of the comments was, how do you plan on compensating the rights holders for the people who actually wrote the book? It presented in about that harsh a tone, or harsher. And his answer was pretty bad. His answer was, well, I put ChatGPT as my co-author, so we live in, and then he goes on this little soliloquy on, we live in a time where it's hard to sort of figure out who has what rights. And I'm just like, ooh. It speaks to a lot of the points you were making about trying to sort through all of this stuff for the benefit of who actually came up with the concepts to begin with. Jody, I'm going to turn to you. Interesting story. You know, what Jason said sort of tapped into something that I had been thinking about, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What's your take?
So first of all, frankly, I was very surprised that the creators of these platforms didn't actually look at the laws existing. There's got to be more. I mean, you know, I usually give people benefit of the doubt, saying, listen, I think you should have done your research. But I think they're pushing the envelope. Either it's out of hubris to say, well, we can do what we want, and because there's no law that is above the basic law. It'll be interesting to see what the law says about this part. So that's part one. Part two, there's actually another story that came out at NPR about this young kid from Princeton that also went crazy when he saw ChatGPT. He's a CS major, but then he finally realized that these kind of issues, the story that you had shared with the voice bot, he said, how could this harm humans and the creativity that they come out with? So he has launched an application called GPT-0 that actually will detect the signature of whether imagery and content was used. I think he's doing it for imagery first. I don't know how he's going to do it from a content standpoint, but I think it's only a matter of time before. I don't think these platforms will last, because you have to have respect for the data that you're using to train your algorithms, and respect the law alongside, right? Other than saying, hey, I'm going to make a quick buck, right? Make my money and get out before the laws catch up with me. So again, I think it's timing. These are usually the early adopters. I don't want to call them bad actors, because, you know, everybody wants to make money. I get that. But you have to look at it from a long game perspective. All these new initial use cases coming out of ChatGPT, I think it's just a matter of time before. I don't think they're going to make it, is my view. Because lawsuits like this come on and they slap it on. I think it'll stop the others in their suit. But people will find other loopholes, right? That's just the way, like you said, our society works.
Complete agreement. And, you know, I lived in Nashville, you know, I met my wife in Nashville, lived in Nashville for 20 plus years. And one of the things I always found interesting about Nashville was the songwriter community, which is huge and loud in that city. And I found it fascinating as I learned about how litigation in the songwriting community works. If one songwriter, one musician accuses another of plagiarism, accuses somebody from ripping off a riff, or something musically, or something in words lyrically, how that works in court, it is down to an incredible science on what they look at, down to beats per minute, and just like, well, if it's 2 notes and it's like this, then that's not copying, but if it's 3 and it's like that, then it is. I mean, it's crazy, but it paints a picture of how this is ultimately going to work for stuff like this. And no question the laws will catch up, and some of the stuff, at least there being litigation, is a good deterrent. I think you phrased that perfectly. Peter, I'm going to go to you. You've heard what the other 2 panelists have said. Your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of things. But we'll have a couple of different views on where it's going. At the functional end of it, the transformer architecture that's enabling this is basically all about sequence prediction, training up neural nets to be able to generate the next token in a sequence. And as that's now going multimodal, so integrating vision plus language, and all of this is driving more and more generative AI. And at the same time, a lot of effort is going into transfer learning and learning of dynamics. And so there's a long discussion to be had here about, for example, how brains work. This is an area that we work in, spent the last, more than 12 years of my life in it, and my partner decades, his whole life in it. And at the end of the day, these algorithms are not doing things the way brains do them, but much more is, as I like to say, much more is understood about how brains work than most people realize. And these are close to some of the mechanics of the end effect of how brains work. So when you look at something like an algorithm learning small weight adjustments over millions and millions of samples, billions, there is an argument to say that mechanically that's not really doing that much different than a human brain, which has learned by reading all those passages and then being able to compose them again. There is a good argument to say, though, there is kind of a certain originality generation component that you can claim that humans do have that's unique. But a lot of what humans do is repatterning of what they've already learned and trained. So at the moment that you begin to say that, there's, at the end of the day, the courts look at the material. They don't go inside the brain of the individual and say, how did you create that song? They say, is that song similar enough to that song by measures of its similarity? And then they find that there isn't a royalty owed, or there has been a copying. And I think you're going to end up, as this plays out, in the same space, and there will begin to be established norms of practice for determining, well, that is a copy, but that is generation from the AI that is not enough to qualify as infringing on this copyright. So my own view would say that it's going to end up being nuanced in practice, exactly like the cases, and I think Bradley pointed to the best example that's well trodden is songs, because of the economic incentive the courts and society have had to deal with this. And I think it's going to look like that. There are going to be lots of cases where people will bring things claiming infringement, or I want a general royalty over the space, as happened with CD royalties. Some of that will play out, but the more pointed examples will be a base of case law will be built up over the specifics of what we consider too close, so therefore it's a copy, or not close enough, and therefore it is not a copy. So unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be any clear line. And on top of that, the technology is getting better fast, and creativity is becoming, unique creations are things that these tools can do. And I think increasingly, though, the trend is going to be to give the rights of the new things which will be created, which will be more and more divergent from the training sets as time goes on, that those rights will vest in whoever is using the tool, no different than using Adobe's tools to generate something new. It's just that more and more parts of that will be automated. So I see a complex landscape in the future that bears a lot of resemblance, likely, to the way society has arbitrated these products or these situations already with human creators.
It definitely, yeah. I think you could easily see it'll be like its own legal realm. And another, got a friend who practices maritime law, and it's like these niche areas of law where, over time, it's the rule set is well established, but nothing about it is intuitive. It all had to be studied. They're very effective, and I think that's what we'll end up here. Great commentary all the way around. I want to make sure we get to the last story, and I'm going to read this headline. This is from Uproxx. People are testing GPT chat AI. That's a commentary unto itself, what people have called this thing, but I'm going to read it verbatim. People are testing GPT chat AI and sharing their hilarious results on Twitter. So there's 10 examples here, and I want to close just by asking each of you what your favorite one is. But I will note that this is what makes OpenAI, this is what just very different, is that they're likable. And so many people have used this, and they've gained a little bit of utility out of it. There's something funny. Maybe they've done something with their kids. It totally changes the complexion of the ethics discussion in a way that we didn't see with Facebook. Everybody hates Facebook, so it made it real easy, like, to talk about ethics because they're such a manipulator and so abusive to begin with. It's different with them, and it's going to be real interesting to watch. And including this story at the end is a way to illustrate that. But I want to indulge it for a minute and just ask you. There's 10 stories here. Jody, I'm going to start with you. Peter, and then finish with Jason. What was your favorite one of these 10 illustrations they included here?
So I had two that I'm split on, which I think were the funniest. One was trying to find a girlfriend proposing to a girl, and the other one was the admissions counselor. And I say that because I got two boys in their early 20s, and so we talk about these things all the time. I think, at some point, can people actually detect, whether something is authentic or not from the heart? New York City public schools, banned ChatGPT, but I don't think that's the answer either. So I think this is very interesting. People will try it, but I think young kids will use it for fun. I'm just concerned about the harm that it could potentially cause, right? But yeah, these two were the ones that were a tie for me.
Nice. Yeah, no, and completely agree on your point as well. Peter, same question for you. Which one of these stood out to you as the champion humor case here?
Yeah, so I'm just had to refresh my memory to them, but I'd say, nothing made me rolling on the floor with laughter. I haven't seen any of the ChatGPT jokes yet that I thought were, fantastically funny. I think the fun one was the first one on quantum theory and this style of Snoop Dogg. Just frankly, because the mash of those two styles, the mashup, as I might call it, came out pretty cool, and I just thought it was a cute, simple way to do it. On maybe a slightly different answer, not so much on the fun side, but one I do want to point to as being an emerging thing you're going to see more of is if you look at the one at the very bottom, the biased activist one. Just FYI, to the harm point Joni was saying, I think you're going to see increasing use of these tools for massive manipulation of social opinion due to custom trolling, where the algorithms are learning persuasion. And you see beginning evidence there. That today they've been applied in general persuasion, but what happens when they start to get specific on that persuasion? And so there's an area there that's not so much a funny thing, but which one was impactful maybe.
Even that phrase custom trolling is gross.
It is. It's a government committee looking at what's going on with that, and if there's ways to put curbs around these things to do it, to stop that. But yeah, it's a concern. It's a concern. So I was surprised to see the activist in the list of examples.
Jason, I'm going to give you the last word. Your favorite one of these examples here.
Yeah, I had to chuckle. I get a mental image of my grandmother when I read this, which was somebody's idea of a fun way to ensure free and fair elections is to have people enter a bouncy house and then land on the candidate of their choice. Can't see that working in mass, but it's very funny. And that's the way that I can see, ChatGPT being used for really just fun, lighthearted stuff. I do find it interesting as to how institutions of education and specifically higher learning are going to take measures to ensure that the tool is not being used. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time.
Yeah, it will. My wife and I have an 11-year-old son, and he like so many kids, it's a struggle to get him to read as much as I would like him to read. And when he finds something he likes to read, it's no problem. If it's not something he wants to read, it's a big problem. And so, ChatGPT is made for people like that to let me just solve the problem of not reading the thing I don't want to read, so I then don't have to write the thing I don't want to write, and then I don't learn anything, and I just, that's no way to go about doing things. It's kind of self-defeating. So yeah, we're all studying that. Look, this has been great. I appreciate the time y'all have shared, your expertise that y'all have shared with not just me, but the audience as well. It's greatly appreciated.
Awesome.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Great session. Appreciate it.
For This Week in Voice, Season 8, Episode 1. Thank you for watching if you're watching on YouTube, listening to us if you're on your podcast provider of choice. Until next time.